Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. And on behalf of NASOM, its board members, its staff, and our NASOM family, we really want to say thank you for being here with us on this Friday evening. And also we want to thank our speaker for today, Beatrice Leong. Thank you so much, Beatrice, for coming on our platform to share your story. And before we hear it from Beatrice, I'd like to read her bio. And then she will share what she has to say. Beatrice is a documentary filmmaker, a curator, and a community manager. She's currently involved in a health tech startup initiative. She is an RMIT Australia graduate in fashion and graphic design. After going through a lifetime of mental health struggle and multiple misdiagnoses, she is finally correctly diagnosed with autism at the age of 36. She is a vocal advocate for actual autistics, representation in all conversations, and policies about the community. She is currently in development for a documentary entitled The Lost Girls, highlighting the trials and tribulations of late diagnosed autistic women. Beatrice, it's all yours now.
Okay, thanks, Anne. It's a bit weird to hear my bio read out back to me. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for making time on a Friday evening to come, especially some friends, some familiar names that I see. You guys are probably sick of hearing me talk about this anyway, but thanks. So for those who don't know me, I think as Anne said, I think first and foremost, I always introduce myself as a storyteller. Everything that I do had always been about talking about stories and telling stories about myself, about others. So that's predominantly what I do. And over the years, I have somehow got into building communities and also been involved in a few efforts where I actually run spaces. And I'm very well versed with urban architecture and also building spaces that are inclusive. So today, I think all of us here are not unfamiliar with autism. We are either part of it, we work with it, we are autistics, or we are carers of someone who is autistic. What I would like to share today is hopefully a different perspective so that you can take away at the end of my sharing that, hey, what I thought about autism, there could be a different perspective. And I wanted to also acknowledge and thank NASOM for actually giving me this platform and space. I think this is incredible. And as Anne said, I'm also really surprised that this is the very first time that an actual adult autistic is sharing on this platform, and I hope this won't be the last. And I wanted to also wanted to say that there may be a few triggering things in my sharing, which will include assault and also.
Hey, DJ.
Sorry. No problem. So I just wanted to put out trigger warning that I may mention certain things that has to do with assault. And if you need me to mute, just privately message me and I will gloss over it and move on from that topic. And I'd like to start by taking everyone through, let me share my screen. I did a little slideshow. Hope you guys could see the screen. So I wanted to take you through telling you my story from when I was a kid to who I am today, for you to look at the different life stages that I've gone through, and then let's talk about the big topic of how exactly does autism really doesn't just affect an individual, but it's really a communal thing. And it's more than just a singular experience. It's an experience that affects a community. So to get to know me a little bit again, I've done many different things in my life. I have I'm a film producer. I do TV shows. I do commercials. I am heavily involved in documentary filmmaking for at least the last 12 years. I do independent projects. I do a lot of work in regards to environmental independent documentaries. Some of my films and some of my short films have traveled quite well in the few documentary festivals. I used to run screenings. I have somehow the gift of bringing 200 people into a back lane to watch films. So I'm somehow very good at bringing people together. I used to run the gallery. I also work with migrant workers and youth in rural areas where I teach them a little bit about storytelling. So that's a little photo exhibition that they did where I was the subject. That was quite cute. That was about 6 years ago. I had always been a storyteller. It always does look as if that I have a huge group of friends and I have a lot of stories to tell and I'm always in the middle of a group, but in a lot of my memory, I'm always actually the quiet one. I'm very, very good at sitting behind and being sociable just enough for people to think that like, hey, she gets it. She's part of the crowd. And then I would very quietly
she hasn't really felt
go
anything
away.
this Ramadan, and then she goes to the masjid.
I'm sorry, can you please mute yourself?
No problem.
All right. Sorry, Beatrice.
No problem. Yeah, so, and my days of starting to tell stories comes from a very young age. I was part of this program called The Brats that's run by The Star. It's a really, really popular young journalist reporters program. And I think you get to go in when you're 16 and you could actually write news pieces for The Star. It had birthed a lot of very good journalists and also filmmakers from there. So that's where I start when I look back. And it was then that I learned the importance of telling stories and why I have always been a huge advocate of people needing to tell their own stories in their own words. Let me go back a little bit. And I had always been a champion of telling stories about women. I mentor a lot of women. I am also currently mentoring a whole group of young women. I am involved in a schooling campaign that keeps education for women, and I have a long-running project where I am photographing and writing a book about indigenous grandmothers. So I'm not new to telling stories from a female point of view. And I think females are very unique in the sense of how we perceive the world, not just us with autism. And hence, I could also give you a perspective of how different it is to actually be female and be recognized with autism only much later in life, and how did we fall into the gap. So going back to all the way when I was a child, I grew up quite, I think I was a fairly normal kid, being that I was definitely spoiled. So whatever behavioral challenges that I had, it's quickly glossed over. I was the only female in my generation, so I was that precious granddaughter. So a lot of my quirks, pickiness, and a lot of my stubbornness and a lot of my obsession gets enabled by my parents and my grandparents. My grandparents raised me, so it gets enabled by them simply because I was a very, very precious granddaughter. And I have a very close relationship with my grandfather. And it was he started my obsession with ice cream, and it's really not just a thing that I do, but I literally have an Excel sheets that document all the different ice cream flavors that I've ever tried in the last 38 years of my life. I have an encyclopedia of where you can go, even if you're in Slovakia, where is the best ice cream. But somehow it was never picked up as something to note, because liking something, taking selfies with something is normal. So a lot of females share these traits. You do things like that are very ritualistic, very obsessive, be it in books, or music, or writing lyrics. But yeah, it somehow doesn't get picked up, because we picked up a lot of all these obsessions that are a little bit more socially acceptable. And going back to talk about my grandfather, who was I developed well. I hit all my developmental milestones. I could speak. I probably spoke a little too much, but I do have this thing called situational mutism. So sometimes when I'm overly stressed, overly traumatized, or in situations where I am faced in a new environment or being met with something new, I can't talk. And I deeply remember I deeply remember when my grandfather passed away. He had a heart attack while he was visiting me, and I was 6. I was probably about 6 or 7 then. No, yeah, about then, a very young, late toddler. And when he had a heart attack, I knew what was going on. And for a child that is extremely chatty, I found myself unable to talk, not because I was traumatized, but being put in a certain situation, I just could not say. And I sat by my grandfather and actually watched him die. And I never spoke for the next 6 months. But because of how that situation had come to be, no one actually paid attention and thought that that could be an early presentation of autism, because it was so closely related to a very traumatic event. And people, so it was looked over. Everyone was, we were shocked by his death. So that incident, when I look back now, and when I was going through, trying to look at my history of, how, where was the gap, and what didn't feel right. So these are some of the early signs that just wasn't picked up, but it could have, because I went to school and I didn't talk. I was not participating in school, and nobody cared, because I did my homework, I got all the A's, so I wasn't a problem. And because we're Asian, we kind of don't really like kids to talk too much. We think it's okay to be quiet. We think it's okay for girls to keep to themselves. So that situation passed, but I have found that over my primary school years and my high school years, there have been so many other conflicts of similar nature. And every time that there's a death, I would go mute, and I would never know how to perceive what it was. It took me a long time to actually realize this. And the next time that this happened was when I was, and I think this is something that would also show you how differently I actually perceive the world. When I was getting ready to go to Australia to study, I had to do my visa. Actually, I came back and I had to do a visa renewal, and I had to do my health check and everything. And believe it or not, I was actually this 18-year-old girl that was running around on my own, holding files, doing my college application, getting my own bank draft, going to the doctors to do my health check. So I actually turned up with cash in an envelope and hey, I need to do my health check. And at 18 years old, a lot of people don't know this, but I had a lump on my right breast. Didn't know how to talk about it, thinking it was an extremely normal experience for all female. I brought my scan, went to the hospital, looked for an oncologist on my own, and had that lump removed, did further treatment all on my own. That no one thought to, I didn't need parental consent because I was 18 and I had cash to pay for my treatment. No one, and because a lot of all these treatments were dating, it became so routine for me to do it, and I didn't know how to talk about it. And this isn't even some sort of a trauma, it was just not knowing how to perceive what's urgent or what could be shared, or an event that needs support and to be related to someone else. So I actually had breast cancer when I was 18 to 19, all on my own, that no one actually knew. And when I pulled all of this medical history out when I was 36 doing all of this, I think everyone was surprised. And I don't think even today my family knew. So again, this is why I'll get to this point a lot later, but I'm sharing a lot of all of this is because I want to make a point that should I had early diagnosis, I would have had support to know how to advocate for myself, to know how to differentiate that having a lump in your breast is not the same as I have a sore throat. But to me, even till today, I look at both of this as the same because I can't perceive it. Unless someone were to give me a chart of like urgent priority is if you have cancer, this is this, then I may follow that. But it's something that I think a lot of autistics just would not know how to do that differentiation and prioritization. And this is why we are often misunderstood as not having theory of mind or having empathy. But we'll get back to that later. And so I got through fine. I'm good. I'm not sick anymore. And I went on to go to university. I excel in it. Difficult. University was extremely stressful for me because I needed a lot of support. I was on antidepressant. I was constantly going to the doctors to get antidepressants. So it was a very repetitive cycle, and I was on a lot of very, very new trial drugs when SSRI was just being introduced to the market. And this is very early 2000s, late 1999s, early 2000s. SSRIs were very, very new. And I was part of that group that started taking it. So that masked a lot of my symptoms because it numbed, not my symptoms, it masked a lot of my traits because it kind of numbed me through university. I didn't make a lot of friends. I happened to live with a friend from high school, and because I knew him, he was familiar, he took care of everything for me, he knew my parents. So even when I don't come out of the room for a week, it's just me. So sometimes an over familiarity would also cause a lot of your behavior and a lot of how your autistic traits are presented goes unnoticed, because it just doesn't jump out. And when you're being numbed by a lot of cycle of being depressed and getting antidepressant on you, it does help. It does mask a lot of all these traits because you are simply surviving day to day. And I graduated. I did really well. I went on to get like 2 degrees, and I started a master's program. I want to do a lot of things. I was a very, very ambitious kid, but I also liked studying. It was a comfort to me. I didn't want to change the setting again because it's going to be a huge shift I did have a lot of other problems where, I couldn't manage money very well. And I think all across board, autistics have very low financial literacy, maybe because of the impulse control. I don't have an answer to that, but it's something that I do find, uh, something that a lot of autistics are talking across board over. How can we manage? How can we learn financial literacy better? So the next stage of my life starts where I start to have relationships. I'm a little bit hesitant to show you the next slide, but I started going out with men. I do crave for relationships. I want to get married. I want to have babies. I want to date, but I never really quite date because I just don't go to a bar and say hi, or I'm not gonna walk into a party and be sociable and say like, hi, I would like to get to know you. So I met a lot of men through very different means, by either online dating or chatting. So I obviously falls into this whole world of older men who are either married or you know, they're just looking for something different. And I got into that because I just don't know how. And then when you also consume a lot of media, you kind of also, and when media is also very westernized, where you don't really see too much of Asian stories about love and dating online, and you start to see how different people date in the US or in Australia. You kind of I mimic them. And a lot of autistic girls do this. So what happens is we get into a string of relationships that may not be very healthy for us. And I ended up in a lot of very abusive relationships where I don't even know that I'm being hit, or I'm being abused, or I'm being raped, or I'm being used. None of this doesn't register after me because one, I don't talk about relationships with friends because I don't have a set of girlfriends that to share female experience. That's something that I never had. I've never had like a group of females that I would like, hey girl, you know, I can't even think of a line to act it out. And I don't know, and I found that I don't know that I was being abused because I really wanted to. I hesitated with this photo, but I wanted to show you like actually what happened. This was on my birthday, and I was growing up with a man who was a bit of an addict, and he was also a serial cheater. And on my birthday, we were away in Laos, and he was talking to other girls while I had just paid for a trip for us to go away to celebrate my birthday. And when I raised it up, I was being hit by him in public, and I ended up with a lot of bruises and stuff like that. My clothes were torn in public, but what had happened instead was he accidentally broke a finger, and I was so concerned that his finger was broken that I completely forgot that I was half naked in the street in a foreign country with bruise and bite marks on me, that all I could think about was to fix his finger. And it became a whole big issue. And it took me 6 months to look back at these photos and realize that I think I was just hit by a man. And this is a recurring theme in all of my relationships. I don't know how to process what had happened to me until much late until it's delayed. And often when faced with situations like that, and this is why I've also always spoken a lot about to many different mothers who had been connected to me in the last 1 year who have autistic daughters, you need to teach your children about domestic violence and sexual health. Because of how naive we can be and how differently we perceive relationships, sometimes you don't know what is abuse. And that's very dangerous. I am very privileged because I could afford, because I get to go to therapy. I somehow have a very strong awareness of myself that I know something's not right, but I may not know, or I couldn't point out what it was. And I had a therapist who was extremely patient with me to slowly unravel a lot of different things. It was a difficult job. I am the worst client. I am a difficult client. So things like this is important. So if you're raising daughters who are autistics, I'm here as someone to tell you that you cannot shy away from talking about sex. You cannot shy away from talking about men. And even if it's a boy that you're raising, you cannot shy away from teaching them about consent, raising them to be men. We cannot discount that autistic people do not have this part of their life, regardless of where in the spectrum you are, whatever level of support you need. This is a very basic, intrinsic human need and human relationship. We all want to belong. We all want love. So that's that. That's one part of growing up. And as I grew up, compounded with a lot of all this trauma on top of autism, not knowing. So I've also often say that autistic people are generally a traumatized generation. There are no untraumatized autistic. We are traumatized by the world and by society around us every day, because the world that we kind of live in are not made for people who are a little bit more sensitive in our senses, who have a little bit more heightened in our perception of senses, of noises. So every time that I do get out of my house, I had to get ready to face the onslaught of an assault of senses, I would usually call it, from the doorbell ringing, from walking into a mall and repetitive raya. I know it irritates a lot of people, but believe me, if you're autistic, it gets into your ear a lot worse. And a lot of all of this would also translate into a lot of stress, a lot of pain, and with our cup a little more shallow than those of you who are neurotypical, your cup of tolerance gets filled a lot faster, and meltdowns happen in very public places. If you realize, or if you are raising a child, you will realize that meltdowns don't really often happen when they are in a space that they are safe at home, but it often only happens when they're out and things are different. And as an adult, when you have a meltdown, guess what? The public is going to perceive of it like you will be perceived as an aggressive and a drama queen, and you will be perceived as someone who is unhinged. And guess who do the public usually call? The police. I think I've lost count of how many times the security guards and the police have been called upon me. And to be honest, this photo just happened this morning. And it's not something that's pleasant. I can't always, I'm also not always in a position when I am being overloaded with senses or when my needs are not met in the public spaces. And I don't have a place where I could sit and hide or be desensitized. Um, and I am being faced with being threatened by police forces usually, and they are not very nice to meltdowns. You know, I know that the PDRM here have said that they are being trained, but believe me, in the last 11 years that I've seen this, I've always either been strapped, I've either been pulled, I had policemen who also insinuate with um, sexual insults at me, saying that I enjoy this attention, which, you know, so there's a lot of training that also needs to go into teaching the people, the public around us. It's not just awareness that we're talking about, but it's of a training to also what really happens in a meltdown. You know, it's not something that you can stop. I don't have a parent. I don't have a mom who's going to stand there and advocate for me. So how else would I, there has to be another way. And I don't want to always be going into a public space and say, excuse me, hi, I'm autistic. You need to cater to me this way, because that shouldn't be how I live my world. That shouldn't be how I live my life. And and incidents like this happen so often because in Asia, or at least in Malaysia, the understanding of autism remains still that it only happens to children, and people like me who can speak cannot be autistic. I had also been in a situation where I was suicidal, seeking for help, went to an emergency ward. I was scolded by a doctor and say that, please get out. I'm calling the security guard. You cannot be autistic. I cannot help you. You are not suicidal. Go home. So again, I want to reiterate on how, you know, despite how we think that we are aware that there are autistic people around, or how we think that we know about autism and we want to move into being inclusive, the reality on ground is we're not even halfway there yet, you know? And this is a hospital. I'm in a hospital here trying to get some paperwork done. And because of how the different level of awareness among professionals, among caregivers, and among people who are supposed to be specialists in mental health or developmental health, if they themselves are not informed, this is what most people like me would end up with. Multiple different diagnoses that comes at different periods of my life. I have been diagnosed with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar, schizobipolar something, borderline. I've been called, no, I've also had bipolar 1, bipolar 2. Depends on which doctor you ask. I've had borderline, some has even suggested that I'm a sociopath. I've been forced to do the MMPI-2 test just to find out if I have a personality disorder. But when I lay down all of these records and diagnoses, the pattern emerged that every single trait and symptoms that had been talked about, that had been looked at, they were all traits of autism. And it took a long time before someone actually then put all of this together after 36 years and say that, like, excuse me, I think this is the right answer now. You know, you stamp all your card and this is your bonus diagnosis. So I finally then it wasn't an easy journey, and I had to fight for it. And I also it also happened in a very divine way, on how I got my diagnosis, but it took that long. And only then, when I got my diagnosis, I thought that, wow, rainbow and sunshines, now things are going to get better and people are going to be able to understand me better, and I can actually start looking for the help that I need. But guess what? We tried. We tried looking for services. When I say we, it was me and my therapist then, who found it really hard to reconcile everything that's been going on as well. He was confused. I was confused. My neuropsychologist was extremely confused also, because as much as she can hand me a diagnosis, she can't tell me what comes after. So I had to do the work on my own. I had to read. I was on a path to gain as much knowledge as I can. I had to take courses on my own to understand myself, to be able to impart what I think I know, to reconcile and reframe all the previous experiences that I've just shared with you, and look at it from a different lens, to then finally understand this is why I am the way that I am. And to give myself a language and to give myself vocabulary to start to finally identify things that I could not have explained before inside me. So sometimes a lot of people think that, especially, and I have a lot of all these discussions with moms where their kids are not verbal yet and they are very nervous over it. But I want to also say that, like, I didn't have words for a lot of things. I repeat myself a lot of time. It was only when I found the correct set of vocabulary for what I'm feeling that I started to become very fluent in how I want to speak about a certain topic. And that could be true to a lot of younger autistics who have yet to speak. They perhaps have not added, they perhaps had not land on a set of vocabulary that they could identify with. Because prior to actually looking at myself from an autistic lens, I had been going on and on reading about schizophrenia, wondering if I'm schizophrenic, gaslighting myself, looking at all other possible personality disorder, and wondering, like, I don't quite feel like that, but could I be? Nothing ever explained until this. So the diagnosis is important, regardless of at what age. I don't regret it. I don't regret getting it at 36. And I think I think people shouldn't be afraid to also get that diagnosis, because it gives you it gives you knowledge, and knowledge empowers you to move forward. And one of the things that helped me a lot with gaining all this knowledge and why I felt the way that I felt was this one thing that I've hidden to myself for the last 36 years. I have such bad teeth because, one, I'm terrible at brushing it, and I have such bad anxiety that my stomach acid corrodes my gums, and all of my teeth are almost falling apart. And I tried to hide it in my 20s by putting on braces. I told everyone, oh, because I wanted to straighten my teeth. But dear God, my teeth are actually really straight. I've got pretty good genes. I wanted the braces to hold my teeth together. And sometimes I'm amazed at how smart I can be. And after that, when I start to learn that a lot of all these traits where I couldn't keep myself to a routine of keeping my teeth clean and how anxiety had affected me, I finally found a dentist who would work around me. I couldn't stand the noise, so he would work in silence. But if I come into this clinic, He would only do 2 teeth at any one time because that's all I could stand. I couldn't do more than 20 minutes in the chair. And guess what? Today, I have replaced my entire bottom jaw with a whole new set of teeth that finally enables me to talk better and I could eat better. I've not eaten an apple in almost 20 years since my bottom jaw had been falling apart. And now I look at apple like it's the best thing in my life. And I could only get here today to where I am right now is because I could start advocating to a care provider, to a service provider over what I need. I could start planning and tell him, actually, I could not do this because this is me. And I needed this diagnosis to give me that language. And I needed that to empower me to be able to ask for what I want, because I now know what is wrong. I don't want to say what is wrong with me. I now know where my barriers and my challenges are. And it's life-changing, you know? I'm 38. I shouldn't have teeth like that. And it also empowers me to start taking active actions over doctors, psychiatrists who had made grave errors in my medical diagnosis. Because once you label someone with a personality disorder, you're kind of leaving a mark against them that it becomes really hard for them to seek for services. So I have medical trauma. If I'm sick, I don't want to go to see a doctor. I'll be texting my friends first, like, hey, what's wrong with me? Do you think like I'm sick? Do you think this? Before I take myself to a doctor. And all of this is because there were a few doctors who made mistakes. I never knew how to go after them before this, but now I can, because I know where they made the mistake, because I taught myself where they made the mistakes. I taught myself that this is my right to seek for justice of my own, so that it's not to make their life difficult. It's not to say that I want to fight with doctors. It's so that the next girl that walks in through any of the psychiatrist's door could then finally given the help that they should have, that I did not get. And it also helps me so much in getting to know a whole group of girls. When I did my early research, when I started learning on my own at the start, I could only see stories from Americans, stories from Australians, stories of girls who are white, who are different, they're not Asian, so they don't really quite understand. And I was in a lot of women's support group who, they spoke about the different services that they had that we don't, so they can kind of get by, and they had like disability aid, help, work accommodation, employment rights. And my mind was blown because I realized that, like, holy shit, how did we end up here today in this country so far behind that I don't have the services to where I live? Is that why I can't thrive? Is that why? No, I can't say I don't thrive. I think I've done really well for a 38 years old, but I had to move mountains to get here. And then I meet people that I've been writing a lot about who had trusted me enough to tell their stories for them. And I'm ever so grateful because I now have the words to be able to explain what each and every one of us is going through, the sensory issues that we have, the injustice that we get, the employment rights that we don't get. What if someday someone's going to say, she's autistic, I don't want her on a project? If you think that had never happened to me, it had. I've been dropped from projects because people think that I'm bipolar. Thank God I kind of had the skill to start running my own business, or else, I'll be hopping mad a lot. So And a part of that, I've also connected with mothers, doctors, other autistics who live in the UK, in the US. I've been doing a lot of crisis training with an expert in the US as well. That's something that I'm hoping to start in Malaysia on crisis support for women, especially for domestic violence. And talking to mothers, especially, I love talking to mothers. Not because I have this thing, but talking to mothers made me understand and reconcile a lot of my anger of why didn't my mother help me? And the reason why I'm on this path of needing to, I could very well just pack my bags up and go live in a hut by the beach, which I love to, and never ever interact with people again. And believe me, that will give me a lot of peace. But I chose, I like stories. I love stories. I do like people. I say often that I don't, but I do. I love listening to what people have to say. I enjoy watching how people interact with each other. And I'm in the profession within a health tech and also in being a documentary filmmaker where my world doesn't revolve around me. I'm not Pluto that's so far off, you know. I orbit around other people's lives as much as other people's lives also orbits around me. I can't exist alone. Neither can any one of you here exist alone. We are humans, we are tribals, we want to all belong. So we need to learn or we need to find a way to live life together where this world and the society that we live in are made for all of us together. So no one person is any more stressed just to step out of their homes. And as much as I say, please include us, please include the autistic, it's not about asking the world or the society to please change your ways so that one of us could go out too. Because when you build something, when you build policies, when you build an environment for someone who is autistic or neurodiverse or with any form of disability, you are building a world that you too could inhabit with a lot less stress. And these are all proven facts. I think there's a lot of very fascinating new studies over how to look at disability from the social model instead of it being a charity, and it requires a huge mental shift. And it's very apparent in when we think about what autism. So I want to go back to talk about factuals and to talk about facts and to talk about the different diagnostical tools on how do we identify if someone is autistic or not. And it always boils down to whatever models you look at, whatever criteria that you look at, it will always come down to barriers in social communication, barriers in social interaction, repetitive behavior. And if you look at it closely, out of these three triads, 2 out of 3 are traits that has to do with social skills or social environment. So why then, every time we talk about autism, we want to change the autistic person? Why can't we then look at changing the environment? Because isn't that 2/3 of the factors that affect someone who's autistic? And I think this is a mental shift that I want to invite a lot of us to really think about in how when we try to build services, where we try to build policies, or even in the programmings that we do. Instead of trying to let's correct this autistic person behavior so that they don't scream, they don't yell, they don't get stressed, or Why can't we change the environment for them? Why can't we look at a different way of communicating with people who are autistic? Like in my work, I have it written in my contract that like Beatrice is not required to speak to you. I am very amazed at how I convinced my bosses to put that into the contract, and I've given the same talk to my teammates and over all that I've shared. I hope you get to see that my journey, the story that I'm telling you, isn't so much about your isn't so much about trying to give you a sad story about myself, because I don't think my life is sad at all. I think I've lived a very, very colorful and eventful life. But I was a child that grew up to be an adult that still lives in this world, that still lives in this society. Your child will grow up. Every autistic kid will grow up to be an adult, and that's what we want from them. A lot of us will not survive our children, and I sure do hope that every autistic child that we are raising gets to live the life the way they want to as the person that they are. And that's the most important thing that we need to keep in mind every time we think about how do we want to help the autistic people. It is not just about me changing my behavior, managing my emotions, regulating my emotions. It requires a huge, huge, huge social and political change for us to put in aid, to put in policies to enable this 1% of the population to thrive. And 1% because the data says about 1% of the population is neurodiverse, but I think the number is slightly larger. So we are talking on average 350,000 autistics in Malaysia. We have like a population of 35 million. We need these people to thrive, because 1% sounds very little, but 350,000 members of the society is a lot. And we all have our economic value, we have our cultural value, and we need to help them get there. And we need to relook at how we want to support the cause of autism, the agenda of how do we want to change how we live our life, how we govern, and how we look at disability. We need to start involving people out of the converted. You're not just talking about autism as a medical condition. And I hope that I had just shown you that I am autistic in a public space as much as I'm autistic in my private home. So we need to involve architecture. We need to involve people who built the cities to turn them calm, creating pockets of quiet space, so that someone like me, when I'm caught in a place where it's difficult, I want to know that I have an escape route that I can go by myself with my own dignity intact. I want to know that my friend, people like Rowena or Bunyu that I've written about, they are doctors, brilliant doctors, that their job and their expertise will not be questioned because they're autistic. Right now, none of us have employment protection. We are almost always working in corporates where, like, by charity, let's employ these autistic people to make up our diversity quota. How often do any of these programs work out where, they hold their jobs for longer than a year? A lot of them drops out within 2 months. So I really need to start to question a lot of all these efforts that's being done on whether are you doing it for posterity? Is it a marketing term? Or are you really putting a policy in place where you are involving people like me, people like Adeline, who I think is in the audience, other autistics, to co-design this policy and this programs with you? Because how can anyone else but me be able to tell you what I need to live my life? I kind of think that that's so, like, I'm not here to, Surya kind of say that, like, make it spicy or and I know that sometimes a lot, because I'm a very vocal public person when it comes to certain things. Don't do that. I don't recommend it. You will get death threats. But I want to also say that autism is a conversation. It's not just me, but it's also with my doctors, my therapists, with people in NASOM, with people of other different charities, of different organizations. There are a lot of really good organizations that have their hearts in the right place. But we need to get real and start to look around at people who are leading all this, at the people who are planning all of this. Whether are you having autistic people as your participants, or are we your teammates? And that's something that we really need to think about, and to really drive in the fact that, talking about autism is not a monologue. You need to start conversing with people like me, and there's a lot of us around here. I just had a look at this. So that kind of ends my sharing. I'm gonna stop my screen share now, and I think I spoke a lot longer than I should have. Yeah, I hope that I didn't step on any toes. And yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Beatrice. You spoke a lot. You spoke a lot, but you spoke a lot, and it's very authentic. Thank you for that authentic sharing. And you actually brought up several issues. You spoke about gender. You spoke about you being an Asian, and your late diagnosis, which is a story now. And I like what you said, that people have to start changing the way we look at things, and your training for policymakers and for anyone at all, because you're right, you don't look different. So if it's a physical disability, people may be more empathetic in some cases. So we're really sorry that you have to go through this, but I am pretty sure that this talk has been a great eye-opener for a lot of us, and we will definitely engage in more conversations with you, so that how can we as the National Association take this to a different level? How can you be championing this on our platform? We will definitely want to speak more to you about this. And I like the fact that you said you want to train mothers, who are basically the primary caregivers of most children in this country. And I believe that they need to be empowered from a woman herself, so that they can raise their kids a little bit differently on those very sensitive issues that you spoke. So Beatrice, I'd like to open this up to our listeners here, if they have any questions. Now, if you have a question for Beatrice, please unmute and ask her the question. You can go now. Dwayne Dennis, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, Ann?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay. Beatrice, I'd like to say thank you. I live in the States, and I appreciate your candid sharing, but as well as your arduous journey. All too often, there is a lot of comfort along the autism spectrum, because predominantly they're boys and men who are autistic. And you spoke about the gender significance, that you are a woman and you were a girl, and the inappropriate diagnosis when you were young. To what degree do you believe those inappropriate diagnoses were a result of your gender?
I don't think we have enough time for this, but I think I can clearly illustrate with this because I've been doing a little bit of research on my end because I'm having a very open conversation with the team that misdiagnosed me. What I hadn't shared was I was actually thrown into the psychiatric ward as well. I was given ECT treatments and all of this. And when I started, so I'm on a fact-finding mission also because I'm writing a book and I'm doing my documentary. So it's a good excuse to try and get this out. That's my cat. So there was a similar case to mine of a boy who came to the same doctor, presented with the same kind of presentation as I did, had the same kind of bad coping mechanism that we share because I do have psychosis, but I don't have a belief that someone's talking to me. That guy was diagnosed with ASD. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia and immediately put into the psychiatric ward. And the team that diagnosed me, they were all men. There were no females, so no one could have actually. The only female were the nurses, and nurses are nurses. I mean, they don't have the power to diagnose you. And this case is something that's highly published, and I'm actually my next article is actually about that. So I'm presenting this 2K. So there is a clear gender bias, but I don't think it's a deliberate agenda. I simply think that there is just very little research being done, not enough inclusion of also cultural aspects of a lot of all these diagnostic criteria, because how autism presents to someone in Asia and how autism presents to someone in the US, it's very different too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, I think Lorella just said that. The female data gap is very true. Sorry, my cat is.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Beatrice. Does anyone else have a question? There are a lot of comments on the chat, Beatrice. We will share it with you.
Sure.
We will have
and I have another question since nobody else is going to ask. You know,
okay.
I mean,
Is that Beatrice?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously, you know, you're extremely articulate, and you are educated. And to what degree do you believe that your intellect, to some regard, dissuaded people from saying, "Oh, she can't be autistic because she's too smart"?
Happens all the time.
Okay. Could you talk
all the time? But I want to reiterate, I am very articulate because I work in media. I have 12 years of media training. And in school, I was always running events because I was afraid of being left out. So if you don't want to be left out, you run the events, you throw the parties. So it's, but I'm not always this articulate, but only maybe because I'm talking about a subject that I'm extremely familiar with. But I also cannot deny, and again, like I don't represent all autistics. And I don't believe in the spectrum of mild to severe. I think the spectrum looks very different to a lot of people. I have many other traits that I have not shared that are a little bit more disturbing. But my social verbal skills is extremely good, and I am unfortunately highly intelligent. I have a weird skill of being able to read a book and memorize the book. It's a pain sometimes. Yeah.
Thank you. Dwayne, did Beatrice answer your question?
No, I was just commenting because I mean, you know, Beatrice comes off as extremely intelligent, highly articulate, and I could imagine that to some degree people would suggest, oh, of course she can't be autistic. She's too intelligent. She's too articulate. And so, I mean, that's why I said what I said, based on the conversation that I've heard today.
Yes, it is a comment I get very often until they see me melt down, then they change their mind. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you, Dwayne. Would anyone else like to make a comment or ask a question to Beatrice? Yes,
Beatrice,
Rajwin.
Beatrice, I think you have articulated your story very, very well. I could relate to this as well, because I am a cerebral palsy advocate and inclusion advocate. So very well presented. I'm very proud of you. Let's keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajwin. Okay, we will have time for one more comment. Thank you all for staying back a little longer than planned. I know we just couldn't stop Beatrice because her story was just so powerful.
And there's a few questions. There's a question and also some comments. If you look at the chat right at the bottom.
Okay, Beatrice, you want to look at
Yeah,
the chat?
if someone could
Yeah.
someone could read them out for me, because there's just too much,
Okay.
then
Okay.
I could answer it. Yeah.
Suresh, do you want to read it?
Question from JY. Actually, I'm a mother of a 7-year-old autism daughter. I'm new to NASOM. May I know how can I get to know the support available? Thank you. Maybe you can answer.
JY, we will send you details. If you could leave your email address or your contact number, we will definitely send you more information. Or you can go to our social media sites and leave us a message there. I'd like to read one comment here. It's from Z. It reads, a lot of autistic people cannot advocate themselves due to lacking the vocabulary or communication skills or other hurdles. I'm always grateful for people like you who would advocate for them from your own experiences. And yeah,
I think someone raised their hand.
Oh, someone raised their hands?
iPhone, yeah.
iPhone. Okay.
Ellen Tang. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Ellen.
Now, Beatrice, it's an eye-opener to hear what you say. I have a daughter who is 20 years old. And based on what you share, you have been through quite a lot in your working life. May I know how you overcome the difficulty or the way society at that time may not be so supportive for people with different ability to work, to be included in the society economic?
A very tough question to answer. I think personality-wise, I had always been different, even with or without a mental health. Or I look different. I'm a heavily tattooed girl. You haven't seen the rest of it yet. I used to have a lot more piercings. And I think these were all very early signs of trying to make myself look physically different. So, you know, if you are going to exclude me, let me exclude myself first. So that's not healthy. However, I think I was very, very, very lucky. I was very, very lucky that I stumbled into filmmaking. I absolutely did not do filmmaking. And by working with a producer that had really helped me out, she taught me the power of stories and of understanding deeper about what's beyond what people say, what people tell you. And when you work in TV and when you do a lot of the things that I do, especially when you start doing storyboarding, you start to look at like very, very minor details. And this is where being autistic is really great in TV, because you overthink everything. And in in making shows, we overthink everything. And that helps to also, it helps for me to create conversations because of a position that I hold in creating media. I can always easily say that, like, hey, you know, if this needs a debate, can I bring this into the public sphere? So I've been very blessed that way. And I think that had been a bit of a blessing, and somehow it had also helped to hide a lot of what's going on underneath the surface. I mean, it's not always good. It's not always sunshine and rainbows. There's been difficult times too. Yeah, but being in my industry had helped a little bit, I would say, to be different. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very
I
much.
hope that answers you. Yeah.
Okay, Beatrice, we have one last question which we will address, and it reads, what and how does an adult or person who doesn't fit the stereotype to be assessed with autism? Since it's never been easy for myself and I don't want others to have this type of difficulty to get the assessment. It's from Sarah.
This is my Sarah. Hi, Sarah. Stories help. I know I keep saying this. It's not because I'm a filmmaker or I write, but a lot of us, we consume media more than we know. The media helps to shape perspective. Media helps to shape how society perceives of something. It's a very powerful tool because what you write on social media, what you put on TV matters. So by having a lot more stories, mine, Adeline, Rowena, people that I've been writing, my law schools, I call them, and mainstreaming a lot of all of this newer ideas, so that we are not singular in our ideology of what autism is. All of this helps to create to change the landscape, to change the media landscape, so that whenever people think about autism, they have a different perspective. They don't just think that you cannot be it, because now that you read something for 50 more times, you will start to believe that it's true, right? So it's always very important in thinking through what we communicate out to the world. So it's funny how people say that autistic people are very bad at communication. Actually, I think autistics are really good at communication. We either tell you as it is, or we find the clearest and the best example and analogy to tell you something that makes you understand. Maybe just not very quickly, but it may take a couple of years, but we always get there. But yeah, but it matters in having different perspectives being put into the mainstream media. So this puts the responsibility also on the powers that be, people who runs media, people who runs the larger voice in a certain community, to also look around them and start giving space to the minorities to talk for themselves, to include, you know, maybe Nasom wants an autistic board member, just saying, but you know, to that kind of inclusion is important. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Beatrice. For those of you, you know, if you have your questions there, we will forward it to Beatrice, and we'll see how best she can address it. And also, Beatrice has written articles. And Beatrice, would you share it with us so that we can put it on our social media, and then if they want, they can contact you. So if you're not, thank you. So if you're not following us on social media, please do, so that we can share Beatrice things, and then, you know, you can all get connected to her via social media. So with that, on that note, I would like to say thank you to everybody who's been here, staying up late for us, listening to Beatrice's story. And we would like to take a photograph so that we can send it to Beatrice for her keepsake. For her next presentation, she can include this one as well, maybe. So if you all don't, if you can please turn on your camera if you're comfortable, please do. Otherwise, it is fine. Suresh will take the photographs for us.
Annie, can I ask a last question? Beatrice, regarding her, she did mention about financial literacy. Autism people may experience. They can't really know the value of money. So therefore, I would like to find out, how did she manage herself?
I cannot be any more honest with you than to say that, like, thank God for my grandfather or the people. No, when I meant that, it's not about not knowing how to have please don't put that recording online. I think my grandfather will roll in his grave. But it's not so much about not knowing the value of money, but I think it's about not knowing how to plan ahead. Because when you are living in a traumatized world and when you don't have stability, a lot of autistic people don't have independent, stable life. It's very hard to plan financially. Even I don't have a very stable life, but I am really, really, really lucky, and I am an anomaly. I won't say that I'm the norm, even among the autistic, because I landed on a career that was good for me. I landed on something that I was really good at, and I could, market myself in a very niche way without needing to. And I also self-run a lot of projects because people don't want to work with me. I have to create my own work. So yeah. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I hope
Thank
it
you.
answers you a little bit.
Thank you.
Can all of you switch on your camera, please? Don't mind. Just 1 minute so that we can just take a quick shot of everyone, smiling shot. It's a Friday night.
What difference, Suresh?
No, we are the lost souls. We are all here. Okay, guys. 1, 2, 3. Give me a best smile. 1, 2, 3. One more shot. Another page. All right. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank
And
you.
it's
Thank
good.
you so much, everybody. Thanks for spending a Friday night here.
Thank
everyone.
you. Oh, bye-bye.
Thank you
And
so
thanks,
much.
Anne.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Beatrice. We'll be in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye. Good night.